The idea of plants of four season interest begs the question, do plants have to have 4 seasons of interest or even more than 1 season of interest? And the answer to that is no. I collect old iris and old daylilies, and they're not much to look at out of bloom, so they are not plants of 4 seasons of interest, but I'm not going to get rid of them for that reason. Why even consider this topic of multiple seasons of interest? Well, plants of multiple seasons of interest add more value to a garden display. A plant whose only period of interest is 2 weeks of bloom doesn't, takes up the same amount of space as a plant that is of multiple seasons of interest. If you think of most flowering trees, shrubs, herbaceous perennials, most of them are only in bloom for 2 weeks. So when you have plants of multiple seasons of interest, it helps when you're trying to create a garden display of year-round interest. This can be of more importance or more value as gardens get smaller. You only have so much room if it's filled with plants that are glorious for 2 weeks and dull the rest of the year. Well, most of your garden's going to be dull the rest of the year. But if you own an estate of many, many acres, you could have a garden that's at its peak of bloom on July 4th and dull the rest of the year and not look at it the rest of the year. Or you can have parts of the garden that are dedicated to a specific group of plants like lilacs or irises or daylilies. If you ever read any of Gertrude Jekyll, her estate was, I don't remember whether it was like 20-some acres or 50 acres. It wasn't huge, but it was more than most of us garden on. And she had an aster border, so you imagine that was probably glorious to see for about 6 weeks in the fall, but probably fairly dull the rest of the year. Now, none of this is rules and regulations. This is just some useful guidance when you're designing plantings, because beauty or interest is in the eye of the beholder. But to some extent, it's an exercise in opening your eyes and seeing the beauty that is already there. When we're focused just on the flowers of plants, we sometimes are not aware of other aspects of the plant that are beautiful as well, such as beautiful foliage, attractive bark, fruit displays and seed heads, the overall habit of the plant, or the gorgeous architecture of most leafless trees and shrubs in winter, or the beauty of flower buds and the structure of flowerscapes and inflorescences. If all you're focused on is the flower, you might not see these other aspects, but when you stop and look, you might notice them. I certainly was maybe trained is too strong a word, but growing up gardening, it was the normal practice to cut down the herbaceous perennials the moment you had frost. And certainly some of them are not of any winter interest, but many have beautiful seed heads or structure and can be left for winter interest. So that was a case of learning to see the beauty that was already there. Now, this might not seem at all scientific. Well, I need to remind people that horticulture is not a pure science or hard science. Horticulture is the science, art, and craft of growing plants. So we're not dealing with hard facts. We're dealing more with opinions and sort of guidance. For instance, botany, one of the many sciences that informs horticulture, is a hard or true science, the science of studying plants. But horticulture is not strictly science. It's also the art and craft. So don't get scared if it gets a little bit squishy. And, all of this might suggest that there are taste police out there ready to evaluate your garden and fine you if you're not meeting these standards, but that's certainly not the case at all. When it comes to your own garden, you can do exactly what you want, provided it doesn't involve harming anybody. And if your garden has a 2-week peak of glory or perfection, and that is what you want, that's perfectly okay. And, as I said, I collect things like old irises and daylilies, and they have a limited bloom season. So in designing plantings of year-round interest, does it mean we have to get rid of plants that are just 2-week wonders and no interest the rest of the year? No, we don't need to get rid of the plants that are only of interest for 2 weeks when they're in bloom. But if the goal is to have gardens of year-round interest, it might be beneficial to have them have a smaller role in the garden display. Build the backbone of the garden of plants of multiple seasons or even 4 seasons of interest. But those plants that are, glorious for 2 weeks add a lot of drama to the display as they come and go. They're sort of like the divas in a opera that are on the stage for a few minutes and then exit gracefully. I've been designing garden displays for many decades now, and so when I'm choosing plants, I often ask, what does a particular plant look like out of bloom? Is it still an asset or is it a liability for the display? And, as I said, we do want some of these 2-week wonders because they do add a lot of drama to this display. But if they're not of any interest after that, there are ways to use them. So the floral display is evident, but, they're located where they're not front and center when they're out of bloom. And there are some plants that are glorious in bloom and then quickly go dormant, which is a beneficial trait. Plants of multiple different seasons of interest, a classic example would be crepe myrtles, Lagerstromia. Everyone knows that we grow crepe myrtles for their floral display, but they can also have a good fall foliage display. Not all cultivars color up equally well, and some years they color up better than others. If frost is early, sometimes the foliage will be sort of killed before it has time to color up, but that's a second season of interest if it does have good fall foliage. And many crepe myrtles have colorful bark. The old crepe myrtles that have been in gardens in the South for several hundred years, their bark was sort of green and cream mottled, but with the introduction of the crepe myrtle from Japan, Lagerstromia forii, that cinnamon red color was introduced, and that's quite handsome as well. And then there's the beautiful growth habit of the tree in the winter, provided they haven't been crepe murdered, cut back, And crepe myrtles come in a wide range of color. There you see an example of the beautiful bark on something like a straight forii or one of its hybrids like Natchez. And an example of fall foliage when it, showing that it can at times be really, really beautiful. The crepe myrtles are also handsome in the winter. I said that part of recognizing certain plants as having multiple seasons of interest is seeing the beauty that's always been there. I don't like cold weather, but I'd hate to live in a tropical climate where trees weren't leafless at some point during the year, because many trees have very beautiful architecture in the winter. And 2 trees that I like best of all in the winter rather than the rest of the year are our native dogwood, Cornus florida, Florida meaning flowering, not referring to the state of Florida. And it has this beautiful branching structure where the branches sort of swoop down and then go up. And even long before they drop flowers in the foliage in the fall, they have the next spring's flower buds. But the growth habit of a dogwood is really especially beautiful when it's covered in ice or snow. And I'm not a big fan of, I see spell check changed stellata to stellate. I love spell check. I don't particularly like star magnolia in bloom, but both it and the saucer magnolia, Magnolia soulangeana, are very beautiful in the winter with their silvery stems and the fuzzy buds that look very much like pussy willows. Architectural plants are usually of four-season interest. They are of four seasons interest, though it's very often a fairly static display, not changing much over the year. And architectural plants could be conifers, especially some of the smaller growing ones, which are very sculptural in their forms year-round. And some of the conifers go through fairly dramatic color changes over the years. Some of them have brightly colored new growth that turns green in time, or some of them turn colors, often purple in the winter. And other architectural plants, such as yuccas and agaves and their relatives, their forms are fairly static over the 12 months of the year, but some of them are very showy in bloom. Here's some examples of conifers. They're very definite shapes, are really nice element in the garden to contrast with the majority of plants that are fairly shapeless. Many herbaceous perennials, like asters or salvias, there's really no distinct shape to the overall plant. So some of these very precisely shaped plants are a nice contrast. You see quite a few of these, and the pictures are quite colorful. And in the picture on the right, there are some yuccas showing their architectural shapes. And the things we used to know as woody lilies, I don't know if that term is falling by the wayside because the lily family, they are no longer in the lily family. The lily family has been divided into many other families, and the agaves and yuccas are no longer in the lily family. But anyhow, we referred to them as woody lilies. They add a lot of drama to gardens year-round, and some of them, especially the yuccas, are quite showy in the bloom. On the right is Yucca aloifolia, bloom summer and sometimes again in the fall. Broadleafed evergreens are plants of four-season interest. Many of them can be fairly static, though they're still very valuable in a garden display. I especially value them in the winter when they're a nice contrast with deciduous plants. But some evergreens, broadleafed evergreens, are showy in bloom, such as camellias, and some have showy fruit displays, such as hollies. And a season of interest need not be solely a visual one. Garden displays are enriched by fragrant plants. The tea olives, the osmanthus, and the sweet box, the sarcococa, are handsome evergreens, but are even more valuable for their fragrant flowers, though the flowers themselves are fairly small and not all that showy. Here, an example of a holly and a camellia. This particular camellia, Williamsii hybrid golden spangles, is a colorful foliage display year-round, and then the very showy display of flowers in late winter and early spring. I think a good example of how two similar plants, where one is a plant of, not much interest except for when it blooms, and the other one has multiple seasons of interest, is comparing bearded iris with Siberian irises. The bearded irises generally have bloom for about 2 weeks. Now, if you have a collection of bearded irises, the time that you have irises in the garden is longer than 2 weeks, but any one cultivar only blooms for about 2 weeks. And the bearded iris's foliage is at best fairly dull, and it's often shabby or worse. And remember, I collect old bearded irises, so I still grow them despite that. And there's no fall color to the foliage, and the seed heads are not attractive. Now, Siberian irises are not as flashy in bloom as bearded iris, but the foliage is clean the whole summer. The foliage turns gold in the fall, eventually a rich brown. I always leave it standing all winter. And the seed heads are attractive all winter long. Now, The older Siberian irises are more fertile than the newer varieties, which are more highly hybridized. So a lot of the newer selections of Siberian irises don't produce a lot of fruit. And I use fruit in the botanical sense to mean the seed-bearing part of a plant, not necessarily an edible one. You can see bearded irises on the left. You noticed a little bit of yellowing and browning of foliage on that pinkish one in the center. Certainly some bearded irises have better foliage than others through the summer, but many of them are pretty shabby and require a lot of cleaning up. On the right is the Siberian iris, Caesar's brother, which is a really old cultivar, but still a readily available one, and a really beautiful and reliable plant in the garden. Certainly enjoy it in full bloom. The seeds on the seed pods or fruit on the left are attractive all winter. And on the right, you see the foliage in fall when it first turns a bright sort of rusty orange, and then eventually turning a rich brown. So, maybe that's not the kind of display you want to see in your garden, but it's a display it's a display that pleases me. And I like the change in the seasons that some things like that bring. Everybody knows the big hybrid herbaceous hibiscus. The big floral display lasts for many months in the summer. But some of the wild parents produce real pretty seed pods that persist through the winter months. And the stems that were sort of purplish red in the summer turn silvery in winter. And the whole overall aspect of the plant in the winter is one of a very attractive architecture. And jumping backwards to summer again, both hummingbirds and butterflies enjoy the flowers of the wild hibiscus species, and plants that attract pollinators to the garden, add another element of interest to the garden. Here is Hibiscus coccineus, the Texas star, or scarlet hibiscus. Very beautiful thing in the summer months. The butterflies use those big broad petals as a landing pad, but hummingbirds also visit the flowers. Now, I didn't find a picture of a Hibiscus coccinea in winter, but here you see some of the fruit developing on this plant in probably late summer or fall. And it'll shed all those leaves, and those stems will be a pleasant sort of silvery gray. Many plants that only bloom for 2 weeks become plants of multiple seasons of interest if their foliage is also colorful. There are many, this is a phenomenal time for plant breeding. And a lot of plants, wild plants generally have green foliage, and there are a lot of old garden plants like spireas and weigeolias that are now available with foliage that is not green, but any number of different colors. And so the plant that was only in bloom for 2 weeks is now a source of color throughout the summer months. Here we have 5 different examples of weigeolia, all the same species. On the left is, sort of the original wild type with pink or reddish flowers and green foliage. Not terribly interesting green foliage, but plant breeders have produced plants with yellow or purple or near black foliage or variegated foliages. So even though the floral display is very much the same, the foliage color adds interest throughout the summer months. And plant breeders have also turned many once blooming plants into repeat bloomers, extending their season of interest. I think most people are aware of the many different azalea hybrids nowadays that bloom not only in spring, but for an extended period of time in late summer and fall. But also the weigeolia we just saw a moment ago, there's new selections that bloom repeatedly, and the same is true of lilac and daylilies. Several of herbaceous perennials that I think are of many seasons of interest are two species. Well, one's a hybrid, but Geranium macrorhizum, the big rhizome or geranium, and then the hybrid Cantabrigiense, which has macrorhizum as one of the parents. These are actually geraniums that want a shady location, not a sunny location. And they're both evergreens, so you have attractive foliage year-round. And though they are evergreen, they will lose some of their oldest foliage in the fall, and that often will color up a, red and yellow and orange before it's shed, though it will retain most of its foliage year-round. The foliage is also pine-scented, especially on the macrorhizum, and in my experience, it's a geranium that the deer leave alone. Of course, probably someone in the audience is going to say that they ate it in their garden. And what else do we have? And, so much of this focus on plants of year-round interest is focused on color. And I always like to remind people that green is a color as well. And I think green is a very beautiful color, and gardens can be created of just beautiful green foliage. So there are plants that have long seasons of interest. There are plants that are certainly of year-round interest, either because they look much the same year-round, or things like the crepe myrtle, which has multiple different seasons of interest. But so much of this is focused on color. So remember, we're also dealing with shapes and textures as well. I feel like I've gotten through this terribly fast. There's certainly time for questions if there are any.
I'm sure we'll have some. I know someone had a question in the chat. Let me go ahead and get to the screen where we can see things. Now, someone made a comment that humans can recognize more shades of green than any other color. I thought that was a pretty cool comment. Thanks, Marianne. Someone's putting in a good word for Cornish, Florida's fall show. I definitely agree with that one. The fall color of my dogwoods has always been my favorite thing. And of course, the red berries in the fall are wonderful. I always enjoy the, I think it's robins that come in and just eat them all up in one day.
Yeah, my point on talking about the winter aspect of Cornish, Florida was not meant to ignore that it is certainly a plant of multiple seasons of interest. We certainly love it for its flower display. I think it can be a little dull in the summer. The foliage is fairly dull in the summer, but it's one of the most reliable plants for red fall color. Okay. It's almost 100% guaranteed that if you're growing Cornish, Florida, you're going to have red foliage in the fall. And the fruit display can be showy, but as Chris mentioned, the robins and the bluebirds often take it quite quickly, which is not a bad thing by any means. No. But I wanted to make the point that don't overlook the beauty of deciduous plants in the winter.
And Valerie made a comment that Viburnum carlesii has fabulous fall foliage color. And Nancy has a question for you. Any suggestions for multiple season interest plants that work well on slopes?
On slopes.
On slopes.
Well, most plants can be planted on slopes. So is she looking for ground cover plants on a slope?
Didn't specify she wanted a ground cover.
Well,
common ones, of course, are the creeping junipers, which look the same year round. So I guess that's for season of interest.
Yeah.
No changes.
Most plants would tolerate being on a slope. I think I need a little bit more information in her question.
So Nancy is saying hillside and naturalized area. I've seen some very nice slopes with grasses planted on them.
Yeah.
That look very lovely.
I can't think that any of the plants I mentioned today couldn't work on a slope. Some of them are sun plants and might not work in a woodland area.
Yep. Valerie says that her crepe myrtles don't have many flowers. Is it still too early? Well, this looks like it's the prime season to me.
It would seem like if your crepe myrtle aren't blooming by now, that there might be something's not right. Is it too much shade?
The only thing I can think of that holds them back is shade.
Yeah. Yeah, they're certainly not held back by drought.
It's been a good year for them. So check your shade, Valerie.
Even if you crepe myrtle, it's still going to bloom because it blooms on new wood.
That it does. What about grass? Well, Lily was just saying, what about grass? No specific question. I know they can be very 4 seasons of interest.
Well, the question is, what about grass? When somebody say grass, I think turf. Does she mean grasses or ornamental grasses?
Yeah.
Is that what they mean?
I would hope.
Yeah, well, I love ornamental grasses. They're, well, you know, whether or not something is of multiple seasons of interest is partly in the eye of the beholder. You know, a lot of them are just green foliage in the summer, but it's a very different texture than many other garden plants, so there's value in that. And certainly the ones that don't bloom until late summer and fall are often very handsome all winter long, so that can be a 6 months worth of winter display. And then there are a few things, mostly miscanthus cultivars, that have colorful foliage, variegated foliage, that, you know, add color through the summer. But again, there's that overemphasis on color, color, color. Now, one of my bosses in another public garden say there were 3 essential things in a garden display. The first one was color. The second one was color. Does anybody want to guess what the third most important thing in a garden display was?
Not color, right?
It was color, yes, yes.
Lily did confirm it was ornamental grasses.
Yeah, and at that point in my life, the garden I created in my home garden was all green because I was, you know, knocked over by color all day long at work.
So when are you going to start an all-green garden here at the Arboretum? That'd be fun. Put them on the spot.
Yeah.
Catherine just asked if a recording of this lecture will be available anywhere. I certainly hope so. We post them on YouTube. We had an extremely rough start, so I hope I can assemble something that looks good, but I do hope so. We post all of our videos on YouTube. They are in the midweek programs playlist. We had a good comment from Paul. He says that it might depend upon the cultivar of crepe myrtles if they flower. He commented that the purple leaf ones that he has doesn't start flowering until August, and they do seem to be slower, and they also seem to be more finicky for the amount of light they get. They seem to be very picky as to wanting absolute full sun.
Well, you know, I have wondered if your leaves are pigmented black, whether that prevents the chlorophyll molecules from getting as much sun.
There's, I think, positive and negative aspects for it. It can block it, but I think it's also an accessory compound too, so it can help.
And does anybody know how they got black pigment in crepe myrtles?
Magic, isn't it?
Well, you go in the pet store and they have these day-glow fish where they genetically engineered sea anemone and coral enzyme or genes into the fish, so now they're these fluorescent colors. So is there genetic engineering putting black genes into crepe myrtles and stuff?
I don't think they've done that in an ornamental plant like a crepe myrtle yet.
Well,
right around the corner.
I want to know where that black pigment came from. It's really crazy.
It is, but it's very, very attractive, isn't it? Not a Hort question. Are both spellings of crepe myrtle acceptable? Well, when I was in college, Vandy, I was told that it was spelled C-R-E-P-E.
Did I misspell it?
No. I don't think you did. She's just wondering if it's between crepe with an E and crepe with an A. Maybe we have someone that speaks French in here that can correct us, but I've always used crepe myrtle, and I think our signage here is with an E.
It's not C-R-A-P-E like crepe paper?
No.
Which would make sense because the flowers are crepey.
Yeah, but I think it's E-P-E.
Well,
as someone pointed out, we're trained horticulturalists. We didn't have a lot of English classes, so there you go. So Mauro's asking, how do we access the YouTube recordings? That's nice and easy, Mauro. Everyone's getting my forehead. Sorry about that. I'm trying to stay out of the screen for Doug. Every one of our web pages on our website at the bottom right side has all of our social media contacts. Just scroll down to any one of them and click on the YouTube icon. Our website, of course, is available at jcra.ncsu.edu, and you can get them over there. Okay, let's see if we got some more questions. Oh, well, not quite a question, but sort of. Anne is saying that she has a new raised berm built around drainage. It's in full sun. I need ideas for planting roughly 20 feet by 8 feet. What's a really good plant she can do? You can top off your head.
Well, it's a berm around drainage. What does that mean? Is the berm well drained, or I don't understand whether this is a sunny or shady spot or wet or dry spot.
Yeah, and always on sun is good exposure. I would think with the berm it'd be up and out of things too.
But there was that comment about drainage.
Okay, we might have to go back to that one.
Hmm.
Oh, maybe she just put a comment. Yes, a drainage pipe underground.
So
it's protected away from the water.
Well, when you have a sunny spot, the selection is so huge. What do you like?
That's true. That's definitely true, Anne. Sunny spots are a full palette, and a whole lot of us want full sun, and we don't have it, so we're much more limited. One suggestion I always have for folks, if you do live near the Arboretum, is to come out and take a stroll. As you find plants that you like, write down the names. We do have a lot of our plants labeled, of course, so it should be easy to write down their names, and then hunt them down and try to get some that you like.
And Plant Delight's Nursery has their open house this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I always go out there and discover new plants I didn't know existed before. So that's a great place to see a wide range of plants.
It certainly is, and of course, free admission. Miriam says that she's looking for an ornamental grass with winter interest. The Carex bicknellii is going brown already.
I don't have any experience with Carex bicknellii. Some of my favorite grasses for winter interest are some of our natives, like the switch grasses, panicums. They're gorgeous all winter. Several of our andropogons, like Turnarius, it's just like these little white stars all winter, and it's a fairly small grass, maybe at the most 2 feet tall in bloom. Andropogon glomeratus is a taller andropogon. It's real pretty all winter. A hybrid Muhlenbergia, pink flamingo or flamingo feathers is just gorgeous all winter. A lot of the Muhlenbergias aren't all that interesting in the winter, though Muhlenbergia lindheimeri is real pretty all winter, as far as their inflorescences. Those are some of my favorite.
Flower.
Those are some of my favorite, I think the best ones for winter interest.
So we have a comment from Linda, and she says the correct spelling in English is C-R-E-P-E, based on the fact that the flowers look like crepe paper, C-R-E-P-E paper.
Is that how crepe? I always thought crepe paper was spelled C-R-A-P-E.
Well, as with so many things in English, they're probably spelled both ways, so could be a tendency to start spelling it wrong.
Does crepe paper even exist anymore? These young people might not have ever experienced crepe paper.
There's at least digital crepe paper on the iPad.
Digital crepe paper. We used to, didn't you as a kid do like the strands of crepe paper across the classroom in school? Yeah.
We'd go check the kids' supplies in the children's program.
It's like pipe cleaners. Do they still exist?
I would hope. We still have a supply of them at home. Okay, let's looking for another question in here, and my mom is actually saying it could be either spelling.
Thanks, Mom.
So the real correct spelling is Lagerstromia.
Lagerstromia. Yeah, and somebody's family name.
There's no questions about how to spell those.
Yeah.
And the NCSU toolbox spells it with an A. But we're just going on and on with this one. We'll have to get the NCSU toolbox corrected, won't we? Oh boy, we're having too much fun with spelling on this one. I think we're changing topics. Someone said they bought pipe cleaners last week, Doug, so you don't have to worry about that. American Horticulture Society has it with an A. And sources for Siberian iris. Jack and Mary, that's a good question.
Okay.
I don't think the timing is quite right, but the Iris Society is having a plant sale later this month.
Not this Saturday, the following
Yeah,
Saturday.
thank you, Doug. I could not remember the date.
Yeah.
And I think it's a bearded iris sale. Is
Well,
that correct?
If they're a division of the American Iris Society, that's their focus is bearded
Yeah,
irises.
but I think the Iris Society splits their sales into two sales, and I think they have a beardless iris sale coming in August.
Oh,
So
okay.
that'll be a really great sale. I don't have the date. They didn't have everything confirmed for that sale. So be on the outlook on our website for those details.
Yeah.
And of course, just come to the Iris Society sale here at the Arboretum, and they should know the date by then. Even have posters up. It's a great sale. They have oodles of irises for sale. They're not expensive, which is great. They should have some reflowering ones. And again, I think it's the bearded irises later this month. And the sale will be over here on our back porch, right over here at the auditorium. So it'll be outdoors.
And if you go online, you can find a fair number of nurseries selling Siberian iris. Most of them are selling modern ones, and the breeding in Siberian irises nowadays is to create flat flowers, which are not ugly, but they don't look like a Siberian iris. They look like a small Japanese iris, but there's also a lot of breeding work to make double flowered ones, which look like a wad of toilet paper, just like a double daylily. I won't tell you whether or not I like them or not, but they look like wadded toilet paper. So you guess on your own.
I think we can all infer how you like those.
There's a wonderful, mostly daylily nursery in Vermont, Olallie. It's like Ollalie, or I don't remember always where the double L is, but they also sell maybe 24 different Siberian iris, and a lot of them are taller, older things that still look like Siberian iris. And of course, breeding work nowadays is to make everything real short, and I don't like that aspect either. But the Historic Iris Preservation Society, which is HIPS, their once a year iris sale is starting, I think, to Friday this week. And the first 2 or 3 days is for members. I'm a lifetime member. And then it's open to the public. And the vast majority of those will be bearded irises, but they occasionally have old varieties of Siberian irises. But I like bearded irises from like the 1940s and earlier, and it's a good source for those older ones that are still pretty.
You commented earlier about Caesar's brother. And
Yeah.
That's my favorite, the Siberian. I think
Yeah.
it's just a fantastic cultivar.
It's strong, it's gorgeous, it's tall and graceful, it has great foliage, a beautiful seed display. And I grew up with a mother insisting that we had to deadhead her irises so they would bloom again next year. Mom was wrong, because you can let them set all the seed in the world that they're still going to bloom well the following year.
Yeah. I always left my seed pods on.
Yeah, they're so pretty.
So Vandy is asking, is it difficult to grow Siberian irises from seed? And mine made an occasional seedling in the yard, not a whole lot of them, but a few here and there.
Irises are generally real easy from seed. Again, if you're collecting seeds from a named cultivar, the offspring won't necessarily look like the mother plant. But and I'm not even convinced that the true Caesar's brother really exists in the nursery trade, or not, because it's such a prolific seeder.
Yeah. So Vandy, I grew Iris tectorum by seed last fall. And I read online that it does need stratification, which means just a cold, moist treatment over the winter. So I just sowed them in a pot and kept that pot over the winter time, and they germinated the following spring. And they're upwards of 4 inches tall already. And so I don't know if that's true for Siberian, but you could use that as a general guide.
We have 5 or 6 different irises in the nursery now that we started from seed, probably sown late last year.
Did they grow right away, or did you have to stratify them? Or don't remember?
I don't remember, but it seems like they germinate fairly readily without cold stratification. But if they don't germinate readily, well, I would have done what you do, is just leave them outside.
Yeah.
Can't hurt.
Well, I'm going to try it again this year, but I'm going to sow them right when they're ripe,
Yeah.
and see if they come up right away.
Yeah.
Just do an experiment. And if they don't, they'll just stay out there over the winter, and they'll stratify out there. So let's see. Paul is saying that he has a large clump of Lord Baltimore hibiscus that's every bit 7 feet tall with huge red flowers. Love those really tall perennials that don't need help standing up. Well, I think Doug was definitely in agreement with that one.
Well, I agree that I love Lord Baltimore because I like those tall perennials. You know, the breeders have bred a lot of things shorter, and it's probably really good for the nursery trade because it's easier to bring a 3-foot tall hibiscus to market than a 7-foot tall Lord Baltimore. But I think for garden display, the taller ones are more dramatic. But I have found that Lord Baltimore needs a little help, but maybe under different growing conditions, it's better at standing up. But it's really worth taking the time to stake it.
The hardest perennial I had at the garden center where I worked at to sell was Aster carolinianus.
Oh, yeah.
Because that thing looked horrible in the container.
Yeah.
It's a great landscape plant, but that thing never looked right.
Right.
It would just go in all different directions, and
that's the
vines were difficult. That one was really difficult.
Yeah, it's a climbing vine. It's a climbing woody aster. And it's not all that much to look at, but it starts blooming in October and certainly blooming well into November or even into early December.
So George is asking me when I harvested my iris seeds. I don't remember the exact time when I harvested. It's coming up soon. I harvested them as soon as the fruit started turning a little bit of brown and it started opening in the top, and I just cut them off and collected them. And I think it was in July, but it might have been in early August. So it's right around the corner and it's not far away.
Yeah, I looked at the Iris tectorum in the garden here earlier this week, and I think it'll be another week or several weeks before it starts. The fruit is fully mature.
Yeah, the fruit is full size already, and I believe you told me, Doug, mine is the white one, so it's the cultivar Alba, and that you thought they would come up from seed if I had no other ones nearby, which I know.
The white one will come true from seed if it's not being crossed with the blue one.
So that's a limited example of cultivar that should come up true enough from seed that you can increase your population. And I did originally have 99 of them. I was quite excited. I've already given a few of them away. Siberian iris is good for containers. Is that a question? That was a question. I would think to be fine for a container.
They're fine for a container. I will add that Siberian irises are a little bit slow in getting reestablished if you're getting bare root plants through the mail, but they're easy in containers.
Yep. And that looks like it. Oops, is the local Iris Society you mentioned? Yes, it is the Eastern North Carolina Iris Society. And the sale will be here at the Arboretum. The sale will be right here on our South Terrace, which is a patio located off the Ruby C. McSwain Education Center. So the full announcement's on our website. Just hunt over there to jcra.ncsu.edu, click on calendar, and it is on not this coming Saturday, but 2 Saturdays from now, and you'll see the full announcement on there. And I hope you'll be able to come out here for that sale. How about Farfugium for 4-season interest? Flowers in the autumn, great foliage, some variegated all year where winters are mild.
It's a great plant, and if the winter mild, the foliage looks great all winter long. Whether a plant is of 4 interest, you don't need my approval for that. If the plant pleases you, that's all that matters.
Maybe Judy was more making a comment for everyone else, and I turned it into a question. So, but that is a great one, Judy. Thanks for the suggestion. Oh, Paul's coming back. I think it was hibiscus. The first year it flopped all over the ground, and it's now in its second year standing with no support. So that's great.
I'm glad you found it for sale because it's not that readily available anymore. But it's probably my favorite of the large flowered hybrids.
Well, that looks like that is the end of the question. So thank you so much for Doug.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you everyone else in the audience. I really appreciate you putting up with our issues that we had with the audio. So I'm glad you stayed with it. It took us a little while to get going, but I'm glad that you all were able to survive the audio mishap. I forget who it was, but someone did point out that I was registered twice in Zoom, and I'm sure that was part of the problem. But that second laptop we had, I don't know if it had a boo-boo in it or what was going on. I could not get the audio off, so it was broadcasting audio, even with the lid closed and it in standby, it was still doing the presentation. So something was wrong with that one, and it was fine when I had everything set up. So I do apologize for our last minute errors, and definitely so for the hard start that we had. But I'm glad you stayed with us. I hope it wasn't too bad once we got things straightened out. And a big thank you to Doug for putting up with us and waiting for things to get straightened out. So thanks for a great presentation, Doug, and thank you everyone for showing up. And we'll be back out in the garden next weekend. And the good news is we have a new Wi-Fi unit coming in from T-Mobile in the mail. Hopefully we'll have it next week for the presentation, because we all know what those presentations are like out there, don't we? So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Next week. Have a great week.